Hey, little brother. Miss me?
When looking at Brian Moser and his connection to being the ice truck killer, you most likely think it all dates back to the day he and Dexter found themselves in a disturbing pool of blood. But what if I told you that Brian was actually too far gone even before this infamous incident, meaning he was essentially born evil and not brought into it? And in this video, I'm going to be going over why exactly I think the ice truck killer was always evil, examining how he came to be so messed up all these years. In the original series, we are first introduced to Brian's past towards the finale of season 1 titled Born Free, which aired on December 17th, 2006. In this episode, it's revealed to us that Dexter was in fact not alone in that shipping container all those years ago, and that Brian was actually there with him side by side. This article, which goes into depth in regards to the shipping yard massacre, describes perfectly what happened, but because of the disturbing contents of this event, I will be blurring out some words. On the 3rd of October 1973, 4 people were brutally murdered inside a cargo container under the orders of Hector Estrada, a drug kingpin. One of the victims was Laura Moser, a confidential informant for Harry Morgan. Her 2 young sons, Dexter and Brian Moser, were present during the crime and witnessed their mother and the others being with a chainsaw. The boys were then left behind to sit in for 2 days, early Tuesday through most of Wednesday, before they were found by police. Now, with this in mind, it's easy to believe that a horrific event like this could have done the job in creating someone like the ice truck killer. I mean, after all, it makes sense considering that Brian Moser didn't get the same treatment Dexter did following this chaos, for which Dexter got a new family, a code, and much more, whereas Brian was tossed into the foster care system, leading him to be in and out of mental institutions due to the inability to cope with such a tragedy. But what if I told you that's not all there is to his story? With the release of Dexter Original Sin, we have received a more detailed insight as to how Dexter and Brian were as kids before things took a huge turn. In episode 4 of the new series titled Fender Bender, we see a flashback of Harry, Dexter's adoptive father, babysitting the 2 boys because Laura Moser, their mom, has to continue with the undercover operation they were running, which as we know will eventually go south. This episode explicitly shows us the contrasting differences between Dexter and Brian when they were young, revealing even more why they turned out the way they did. We see this when the camera approaches Brian as he's disturbingly cutting off lizards' tails with his bare hands. Whereas Dexter is actually actively trying to save yard animals and even begins to cry at the sight of their death.
You okay?
I tried to save them.
Oh. Hey. You're okay.
Now, although this is subtle, this provides a huge context to both of these characters' psyches. It essentially confirms that Brian was messed up far before the event even occurred, and that Dexter was actually a nice, caring person who actually felt true emotion, which is heavily implied to be non-existent in the show. Furthermore, it explains why Brian turned out much worse, killing for pure pleasure without a set of morals, and that Dexter, although changed completely by this incident, still kept some of his original innocence through not having the pure intent to kill anyone he wants.
You can't be a killer and a hero. It doesn't work that way!
Although all this evidence shown in the prequel directly foreshadows his heinous crimes as the ice truck killer decades later, it's hard to say he would have gone down to such a dark path if he hadn't been in that gruesome shipping container. I suspect that he would indeed go on to be a weird, maybe even sociopathic individual comparable to someone a little less wild like Joe Goldberg from the show You.
Hello? You? No. No, I'm not doing that. I'm not gonna try to figure out.
This is because we can see how alienated he is from the world and that he indulges in questionable acts, which children his age can't imagine doing. Down the line, he would have likely gotten help here and there from psychiatrists due to the fact that his mother was out very frequently throughout his childhood, experimenting with substances and such, which would result in Brian growing up in a poor environment. The idea of him being evil due to his environment growing up previous to the incident is further strengthened from this Reddit user who describes the keen difference between Dexter and Brian and why they act the way they do. Because Brian's an actual sociopath/psychopath, he was literally diagnosed with ASPD, antisocial personality disorder. Psychopaths are very charismatic. It's called superficial charm. Dexter isn't a true psychopath. He and Henry just thought he was. He's capable of empathy, guilt, love, Debrita Harrison, and therefore he's capable of being socially anxious and awkward, unlike a psychopath like Brian, who would never feel such fears. So Brian is better at socializing because he's a true textbook psychopath, where socializing comes easy to him because he can easily pretend. Dexter isn't actually pretending. I think he's just genuinely awkward or not very social. He genuinely lacks charisma because it's not so easy for him. Brian doesn't have the emotions that he pretends to have, so it's easy for him to be a social chameleon and fit in anywhere he wants. This perfectly describes how Brian is essentially a full-on psychopath, relatively separating Dexter and him in two different categories, which ties back to the idea that it wasn't only because he was older at the time of the shipping container, but that he actually grew up in an environment his mother imposed on him, which resulted in him turning to disturbing things no child usually does. Considering that we have not been shown much more when it comes to the early childhoods of both Dexter and Brian, it's hard to put 100% certainty he was quote-unquote evil from a young age. On top of that, I think it's fair to assume that Brian wasn't actually born evil, but rather slowly introduced to it because of how he grew up. As well, we aren't sure why exactly his father isn't present at the time, leaving there to be speculation that he had a bad father, which could have done things to influence Brian's characteristics later on. However, I do think that him being troubled prior to the container incident did play an important part in creating the monster he became later on, known as the Ice Truck Killer.
Dexter. Hi.
Hey.
I waited a long time to meet you.
But I want to know what you guys thought. Do you think Brian Moser was truly evil from the get-go, or would you say that this idea is taken out of proportion? Let me know in the comments down below. On top of that, please let me know what kind of videos you would like to see in the future, as I will be going through the comments and looking at what you guys want as the audience. As well, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel, as it really helps me make more videos like this, and it's free. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.